Claire and Philip, I presume, are just on their way in. Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our September workshop day. First cab off the rank this morning is Kirsty talking to us about Ahuaki, the Waipa Community Spatial Plan. Vanessa's still on holiday, is she?
Morena Koto, yes, apologies from Vanessa, who is visiting family in France, but will be back with us on Monday of next week. Okay. So excited to be able to provide you with an update today before we commence our next round of engagement with mana whenua and iwi partners, key stakeholders and the community. So this session today will be providing you with an update as to where we're at and then what to expect at the conclusion of that process. Not expecting you to read this. This has been provided to you in your slide pack in Diligent, but essentially on the back of the first round of community engagement in February and March of this year, you're aware we received over 2,000 pieces of feedback, so that we've been working diligently to review that, analyse it and identify what, if any, changes need to be made in terms of the narration for the topics and the interventions. So this is an overview and this will be further informed by the next round of engagement that commences next week. So this incorporates feedback from the general community provided through our survey and online platform, through the face-to-face engagement that we had at community events and through presentations to groups, as well as key stakeholders through webinar and partner sessions. So just in terms of the next few weeks, as you'll recall, elected members endorsed a change to our project program and approach to incorporate an enhanced community participatory process. So we are commencing with engagement with our mana whenua and iwi partners. We have 4 hui that are scheduled to be held. 2 in person, one at Karapiro and one at Otafo Marae here in Te Awamutu, and 2 that are being held online. These will be facilitated by Tiffany Wilson, our mana whenua and engagement lead, and Shane Teruki, supported by members of the project team. And will focus on 3 key areas. And this is really based on feedback that we heard through our earlier engagement. So cultural visibility in our town centres, what we heard when we engaged with mana whenua particularly was the lack of a sense of belonging and feeling that they could see themselves when they came into our town centres. The Māori economy, this is a big gap. And to explore that, and then Māori housing. So we've very much had a focus on papakainga and looking at that through the progression of Plan Change 23, but in engaging with mana whenua particularly, keen to look at housing more generally, particularly in our urban environment, and looking also at affordability of housing to ensure that there is the provision for people to remain within Waipa, but also to return home to be closer to whānau and marae. This is our first for us here in Waipa, adopting a World Cafe approach. So as you'll recall, we went out to our community and asked people to register an interest in taking part. We received 143 registrations of interest. 2 of those were ineligible in that they were people who reside outside of Waipa district. We're partnered with the University of Waikato team, and that has, I think, helped to ensure that we have a robust process. They are members of the political science team and have also been supported by staff within their statistics faculty. So we agreed a methodology and a selection session was held with the University of Waikato and members of the project team. This process was confidential. The selection panel didn't have access to people's identifying details, so it was randomised, anonymous, and we believe defensible. We adopt a purposive approach. And from that, we had a group of 45 participants is what we're aiming for, and contacting people by phone to confirm their availability for the workshops. We have had some people who have said they are no longer available. So we had a follow-up session with the university team yesterday and are just working through to prepare that final list of people who participate. So we have 4 workshops with this group. We have an onboarding session next week in Cambridge, where we will have an introduction from the mayor and facilitators. We're working with an expert facilitator, Helen Ritchie, who is well known to you all. We'll provide a background to Ahuaki, where we'll have an information pack for them to take away and an overview as to what they can expect for the remainder of the process. And there will be information that they can review and prepare in advance of the next session. On the 14th of October, acknowledge that that is the day of the general election. Obviously, there is an opportunity for people to vote in advance of that polling day, but we want to make this a celebration of in a civic event, essentially. So that's really the meaty part of this process, where we will have facilitated sessions with expert staff from across the organisation. The project team and the University of Waikato will also have their representatives in attendance. We'll be working through themed topics with prompt questions and opening that up for discussion. From there, we will have an online session. This will be a follow-up to session 2, and the group will be working to develop recommendations that will then be presented to elected members and key staff on the 4th of November. So really excited about that and hoping that this will help to provide, further information to inform the refinement of the plan. So a lot of work then to follow for the project team through November, through Christmas and into February, where we will then come back to you with a revised plan and seeking approval to notify that for formal consultation. We'll commence a special consultative procedure that will run in parallel with the long-term plan through March and April. With hearings to follow and adoption by the end of the financial year. And we will be celebrating that because this has been a mammoth undertaking for all of us, elected members, staff, consultants, partners, stakeholders, and our community. That's something I think that we can all be proud of. Happy to respond to any questions.
Thanks, Kirsty. A really great update on a project that we know you've left nothing in the tank for, really. You come off the field each day, go, So yeah, our gratitude to you for your commitment. Any questions to Kirsty in respect of this update? Philip.
No questions, Your Worship, but thanks, Kirsty. Yeah, it has been a really long process, and I remember Vanessa coming to the Rural Tours, oh gosh, I don't know when it was, 2 or 3 years ago, and just getting feedback, getting some ideas and comments from the community, and so it's she's worked, well, the whole team's worked really hard, but yeah, it's a long process. So well done.
Thanks, Philip. Any questions for clarifications? Quite pretty straightforward. Thank you so much, Kirsty. That's wonderful. Thank you. The next item is our workshop in respect of our waste minimisation, our pay-as-you-throw methodology. Hi, Dawn. Nice to see you.
Kia ora
I'll leave you to
koutou.
make the introductions.
Kia ora. Our presentation today is looking to start to shape some options for consultation with our community as part of our long-term plan. So with respect to waste minimisation, we've obviously just reviewed our waste minimisation management plan, and through that and our community perception survey, we've certainly heard from our community that there's a level of confusion over who provides these services. And it's thought also that possibly looking to a council provided service for refuse collection may in fact start to reduce some of the contamination impacts that are happening in our curbside recycling service. So coming out of those pieces of work, we look to engage with Eunomia, and introducing Lisa from Eunomia here today to take us through the presentation. Please do feel free to ask questions as we go through the presentation. Our goal is ultimately to arrive at 2 options to take through to consultation with our community as part of the long-term plan, where we look for that feedback as to what our community wants in the way of these services. However, noting there's always a balance to be had in terms of the levels of service that we provide and the complexity of administration and charging regimes that are needed to provide support for those. Also in attendance today is Sabi, who's our waste minimisation team leader, who's equally, if you've got any questions around some of our current services, and noting apologies from both Brian and Sally Fraser, who are taking a well-earned break today. So the team is here to present this for you. So hand over to Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks, Dawn. I'll just do a really quick introduction to Eunomia. I know you've seen me before, but just to remind you, Eunomia is a specialist waste management consultancy. We do research and data analysis and strategy projects. We aren't engineers, so we don't design transfer stations and landfills and things. We advise councils and government and other parts of the sector on how to make things work better. So the piece of work that we've been commissioned to do now is, as Dawn said, to follow up from previous work we've done, and also your WMMP, is to have a look at the ways that a household rubbish collection service could be provided in Waipa that incorporates some aspect of user pays. So this is a service that would be provided by council, not at this stage defining whether that would be a contract or in-house, although most likely it would be a contracted service. And user pays means that in some way the people using the service experience a direct cost for using that service. So we've come up with a long list of options as to how a service could potentially be provided, and we've analysed those for implementation practicalities and also for the advantages and disadvantages of the various systems. And we, in work with the council officers, have narrowed our original 8 options down to 4 that we feel are most appropriate for the district. And what I'm here to do today is just to take you through those 8 options and to explain our reasons for narrowing it down to the 4 preferred options, and to get some feedback from you and to get some guidance as to whether you're happy with the direction we're going in. And after today, we'll take those 4 preferred options if that's where we end up, and we then undertake some detailed modelling. So we look at how much the service might cost to the householder, what the impact might be on waste diversion, and further explore how practical it actually would be to introduce the service in Waipa. So I'll just skip through the context really quickly because I'm sure you're aware of all of this, but what Waipa as a council hasn't provided in a household rubbish collection for quite some time. And there were reasons for exiting the market when that happened, but now we're in quite a different strategic context and quite a different focus as far as waste minimisation is concerned. And so this has led council to look at the idea of providing a service again. Most councils in New Zealand do now provide a household rubbish collection service for exactly the reasons that Waipa is now looking at it as well. And as I mentioned, we're talking about a council controlled service. We're not going to decide today what exactly that might be. And there's a number of different ways that that could actually be delivered once we've made some decisions around what the service is going to be. Do you want to cover the context in too much detail? Okay, all right. So why are we looking at introducing a council service again? There's a number of negative impacts from leaving rubbish collection to the private market, and I'm sure you hear these from customers all the time. There's more trucks travelling around the district because you've got multiple companies picking up rubbish. They don't always collect on the same day, so you've got households putting rubbish out on the street on several different days during the week. The private sector tends to cherry pick the services. So they focus on the ones that are really easy and really profitable. And that means that the rural areas often end up missing out. And as Dawn mentioned, council often gets calls from the community saying that their collection hasn't happened and they perceive it as being a council service. And so they do get confused and call council instead of their service provider. The waste assessment, which was the long technical document that was written before you adopted your last WMMP, it identified all of these aspects as potential issues. And as those issues were addressed through your WMMP, the question was asked whether council should investigate a council controlled service. And when the WMMP went out for consultation, a very significant proportion of submitters were in favour of council undertaking that investigation. There's a number of other reasons why we're looking at this now, and one of the most significant ones is that government has now come out with their curbside standardisation rules for councils. This means that councils need to provide a household recycling and a household food scraps collection. And the deadline date for Waipa is 1st of January 2027. And because we don't want to be starting new services on the 1st of January, that's not a great time. In practicality, that actually means trying to do that at some time during the year preceding. And with the way that your contract dates are working out, then a sensible date to be aiming for is July 2026. And potentially a food scraps collection may be combined with a recycling collection, may be combined with a rubbish collection service as well. The other change that's come out from government is that they've set diversion targets for councils, and the initial one, which is a 30% diversion, is pretty much where Waipa is already sitting, but the next one that's coming up is 40% diversion of household waste by 2028, and that is going to be quite challenging. So when we've gone through the options evaluation for you, we will explore the 4 preferred options in detail. We will make some recommendations as to how we think those services could be delivered. And as I said, we will come up with some numbers that show how much each of the different options cost and what waste diversion we think they're likely to achieve. So to get into the options, essentially, you've got 2 main ways that you can pick up rubbish. You can pick it up in bags, you can pick it up in wheelie bins. The 2 methodologies have advantages and disadvantages compared to each other. We've looked at a number of options that fall under both headings, but just to quickly run through this because they apply across all of the options. The advantages of bags is that they can be better on difficult terrain. So if you've got hilly roads, then bags are much better than wheelie bins, which are prone to falling over or being blown over. Bags can be vulnerable to animal strike, whether that's dogs or cats or possums or whatever else is out there. An advantage of a bag-based service is that once the collection vehicle's gone through, there's nothing left behind. So there's no bins for people to take back in, which is particularly important for rural areas where your driveway might be, 700-800 meters long. And because the private sector tends to focus on providing collections using wheelie bins, bags can be perceived as council directly competing with the private sector less. The downside of bags is the manual handling that's required. So somebody actually has to get out of the truck, pick up the bag. Not only does that have issues from the health and safety of the operator, but also a lot of the roads in Waipa are open. They've got higher speed limits, and there's definite issues around somebody getting in and out of vehicles. On wheelie bins, people tend to prefer bins. They quite like having something that they can put their rubbish into and then close the lid and it's all secured. They do have a tendency to fill a bin once they've got it. And so this is why we tend to see less diversion of recycling and food scraps when they are accompanied with a wheelie bin service. Bins do need to be taken back in at some stage once they're emptied. And because customers do have a wheelie bin and they do have that tendency to kind of put everything into the bin, they're less likely to then put things into their recycling bin that they shouldn't. So there isn't clear evidence for this, but we suspect that recycling collections are probably less contaminated if rubbish is collected in a wheelie bin, but bins cost money. And so at the start of a service, then there is that capital investment to buy all of the bins and deliver them to people. So is there any questions on that before I talk about each of the options in more detail? I just keep going.
The data that you guys use in regards to this, how many comparisons do you do with other councils? Just out of curiosity.
So when we do the analysis of each of the services, we are basing our modelling on a whole load of case studies and real life examples that we have from other councils. So that's how we work. We know how these services work in other places, and we aggregate, what type of rubbish are people likely to put out, how much are they likely to put out, what impact does that have on the recycling collections. So we're not kind of taking numbers from England or America or anything like that. This is real life. This is what happens in New Zealand.
Kind of a bit more focused on those councils that have already invested at the wheelie bin stage, as opposed to the ones they haven't.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've worked with a number of councils that have a similar makeup to Waipa as well. So you don't want to compare Waipa to Hamilton, for example. You want to be comparing Waipa to Whakatane or Opotiki or the Western Bay. So we make sure that we're using numbers that will actually make sense here. And we even go to the extent of measuring all of the roads in the district. So we know if you're going to run a collection route in this district, how long is it going to take you and how far do you need to drive? So, yeah.
A quick one on bins versus bags. Have you done any comparison on the massive plastic used in the bags versus the bins over the lifetime of the bins?
Yes.
I suspect it comes out against the bins.
We do take that into account. I guess to bear in mind that most people, even if they're using a wheelie bin for rubbish, they still use a bag to put their rubbish into. So there's that factor, but also the vast majority of wheelie bins are actually made out of recycled plastic. They have a very high recycled content, not too high, otherwise the quality they can't stand up to the collections. And at the end of their lives, bins are recycled back into bins as well. But it is something that we take into account when we do carbon implication calculations. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. So quite a lot of councils now I see us starting with providing wheelie bins, and then you have a tag system.
Yep, that's on the list.
Yeah.
Yep. So
I'm just making myself familiar with that in TCDC. We've got a holiday. It's put things out in the last month.
Yeah. Shall I get into the options? Okay.
just wanted to explore a bit more about the lower temptation to contaminate recycling if you've got a wheelie bin, for rubbish. Have you got any sort of specific data on that? Like you said, it was kind of an assumption that you were making. You don't have any?
There is some data. There has been some research done, but it's from Auckland Council. So I mean, we know quite a bit about how people behave when they have a wheelie bin compared to a bag. Palmerston North City Council is quite a useful one to look at because council provides a bag collection, but then most people actually use wheelie bins through a private collector. So we know the difference between what people put into bins and what they put into bags. We don't know for Palmerston North what difference that makes to recycling contamination though. So we are making some assumptions around that, saying that a wheelie bin, they're less likely to contaminate their recycling collection. Also worth bearing in mind that if you use a bag-based service, you get very, very little green waste in your rubbish. So yeah, swings and roundabouts with both. But it's something that we will look into more closely in the next stage. Yeah. So option 1 of 8, we look at the bag-based options first. And so the first bag option is prepaid bags. So this is where council prints up the bags. It's used in Otorohanga, it's used in Waitomo. So there's quite a few examples around here. It's a very direct cost to the customer. So as a user pays system, it's a very effective one. Because you're printing the bags, you can put a whole lot of information on them. You can educate people, remind them to use their recycling collection, that type of thing. And you can make sure that the bag is a consistent size and it's a consistent quality. So advantages, as I've mentioned, but the disadvantages, the customers need to have official bags to participate in the collection. So if you don't happen to have any bags in the house, you have to go out and get one. You can't just put your rubbish out in something else. Sorry, that's an error that's snuck in there. I'm not sure where that's come from. Council needs to manage bin stocks. That should be council needs to manage bag stocks.
Is that not what we have now? No, but we have a bag collection, even though it's a private provider, but it's the same bags.
Same system. So it's a 60-litre bag, but in this case, council would be the ones that print and distribute the bags either directly or through a retailer, and would have a contractor that picks the bags up.
Is there anything to stop then a private bin company also being used by certain? So it could be a dual system.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you can't stop the private sector from participating in this market. No.
Just as a point of interest, though, my neighbour and myself share the cost of a bin, and it's actually cheaper for us to do that than to buy the yellow bags. So, you know,
it's definitely a consideration. Yep.
Plus it's cleaner in your garage and that type of thing.
Yeah. So option 2 is very similar to that, but instead of council providing printed bags, you provide stickers. So the householder provides their own bag, and then they buy a stash of stickers, and every time they want to put a bag out, they put a sticker on the bag. There can be a bit of a perception from householders that they're kind of paying for the service twice, because they have to buy the bags and they have to buy the stickers, but it's only the price of the sticker that's going towards the cost of the collection, not the cost of the bag. So that can be a little bit confusing for people to get their heads around. And it also means that the relationship between the cost of the system and the customer is slightly less direct than a bag system. Stickers are easier though. It's easier to buy a roll of stickers than it is to buy a big roll of bags and to store them. And so for that reason, we do see slightly increased participation over a bag-based service. But one of the big downsides of this is because the householder is providing the bag, they use whatever they like. So it may not be 60 litres, it may be bigger, and it may also not be good quality. So you come along to collect it and then you find that the bag's actually burst on the ground. Option 3, this is where council provides the service as previously described, but a portion of the service is rates funded. And then once the householder has worked their way through the rates funded portion that they're provided, whether that's a bunch of stickers or a bunch of bags, they then have to pay for more. One of the downsides of this, and I have experienced this personally, is the administration of this. Because the portion of the service is rates funded, you have to then make sure that that rates funded distribution of stickers or bags actually gets to the person that's living in the house and is using the service. And this can be quite tricky. You can also end up in situations where tenants have moved out. They've taken the rates funded allocation with them. And so you have someone move in and go, well, where's my stickers? Where's my bags? One of the advantages for this is that it's really good for householders who don't create very much rubbish. And there can be a bit of a driver for them to think, well, I've only got 52 bags. Let's see if I can actually stick to just 52 bags. Because council's funding some of this through rates, it does tend to end up with having a higher market share of the overall rubbish collection market.
Just make a comment on that one. Rotorua had a similar bag supply, and they used to throw the bags off the truck into your driveway. So maybe 50 bags, there were paper bags this time, by the way.
I remember those.
And if you had quite a number of people living down the same driveway, people used to pinch your delivery of bags so you finished up the time. And that happened quite a number of times. And I never really dared to accuse any of my neighbours.
No. So yeah, administration and delivery of this is quite a significant disadvantage. So then we move on to the wheeled bin based options, and excuse the waste management bins, but this was just a nice little graphic of the most common bin sizes that people provide. The preferred ones are the 140 litre and 80 litre, and the reason for this is the enormous amount of garden waste that you end up with in a 240 litre bin. I know we've had this conversation before. So whatever system you introduce, it would most likely be a 140 or an 80 litre bin that was used. First one is RFID tags. RFID stands for radio frequency ID identification tags. So this is a little token that's stuck to the bin, and it enables you to read the code on the tag. That tag might be associated with an address or with a specific account. And what some collection systems do is they use those tags to charge for the service. So for example, every time a bin is picked up, the truck reads the tag, says, oh, that's that account, I'll add on an empty to that account. But the downside with this is most rubbish trucks could get through probably 1,200 or 1,000 households on a run. If they have to stop, read the tag, check that it's been read, then empty the bin, that drops significantly. So you're probably down to maybe 800 or 900 households on a run. And we still don't see that these systems are accurate enough. So even if they're 99% accurate, if you're charging a household based on that, you're getting 1% of them wrong. And we personally feel like that's too high, especially for a council service. The private sector may get away with it because they have the direct relationship with the customer and there's less of them, but we feel for a council service that's too high. Option 5 is prepaid tags. So this is a system that's being introduced in quite a few other areas in New Zealand. We worked with Western Bay of Plenty District Council when they first introduced their system. They had teething problems, absolutely, but now that they're a few years into that system, they've ironed out most of those teething problems and it's now actually working really well. So council delivers a bin to the customer. Customer then buys the tags. Every time they want their bin emptied, they put a tag on the handle, and as the truck comes around, tag gets ripped off, bin gets emptied. Yeah.
Does that again though involve the truck driver getting out? Yeah, so.
Yep. So you usually end up with a runner that goes ahead of the truck and they take the tags off and they slap a sticker on any bins that do not have a tag. So yes, definite issues with.
Could you not see the tag?
You have to take the tag off. Because once the bin's been emptied, that tag needs to be removed so that you then know that that tag's been used.
And environmentally, it's probably fairly average.
Yeah, I mean, Western Bay had some issues with littering. They had issues with people stealing tags off bins. Most of that has been resolved. And so we still feel like, jumping ahead a bit, we still feel like this is an option worth looking at, but definitely those are some of the disadvantages of the system. It's also a bit of a job with administration, because you do tend to get quite a few cases where someone's forgotten to put the tag on, or their neighbours or someone else, let's not blame the neighbours, taken the tag off so that they can put it on their bin instead. The advantages of it is it's really good for smaller households and households that produce less waste, because they only put their bin out when they need to. And if they don't put it out as often, it doesn't cost them as much. Customers tend to quite like this service, and so the number of households that actually use it and use it correctly is quite high. Households that have struggled with it in some places are those that are putting rubbish in their bin that needs to get picked up every week, even if the bin is not full. So they're having to put a tag on the bin to get it emptied, even though it doesn't actually really need to be emptied. And you can probably imagine what types of waste that would be. Because it's a wheelie bin based service, and because it's a tag based service, which is quite similar to the way the private sector works often, council does end up being perceived as competing with the private sector much more than some other systems.
So those tags, 140 litre that we're getting supplied at
TCDC.
$8 tag. In the private back here in the Waipa, we've got private collection. It's $19 a month. One collect. We only need one collection in our house.
I just picked up about the frequent collection, but if we are aiming to have a food collection, as a food scrap collection, that would reduce some of the issues around that waste that doesn't last a long time. Yeah, that's it. It's incontinence products, it's medical waste, it's families that have got young children that tend to be the issue. Yeah, because Western Bay has a food scraps collection as well, and it does help, but it's not everything. Option 6 is a bit of a private sector one. It's where the customer installs an app on their phone or their device, and every time they want a collection, they use the app to request a collection. On the next collection round, the truck knows that that bin needs to be emptied. We don't see that this is really an option for councils because of the number of people who would struggle or would not be able to use this service. Also, because of the fact that you're trying to provide something like this to the entire community, the administration and the service requests involved will be quite high. So we didn't even bother doing advantages and disadvantages for that one. Option 7 is another bin-based option, but this is where you charge the householders based on the weight of their bin rather than how frequently it's getting picked up. It's another system where you can use RFID tags, but it hasn't been used in New Zealand very successfully at all. In fact, it hasn't been used anywhere very successfully at all. And it has the same problems in that the error rate and therefore billing and administration is very demanding for a council. Last option is who knew there were so many ways to pick up rubbish? So the last option, wheelie bin based service, but this is where the customers pay a different charge depending on either how frequently their bin is picked up or how big it is. So you could share your bin with your neighbour, or you could choose to only have it picked up once every 2 weeks.
and you would pay less than somebody who gets a weekly collection. So it's easier to administer because the driver of the truck knows which bins they should expect to be picking up on each day, or the householder has a smaller bin than their neighbour, and so the driver just picks up everything. And this is one option where we do see RFID tags being used, and they're used to make sure that the bin is at the property it should be at, because bins do tend to travel a little. So advantages and disadvantages of this is it's great for small households and low users because they can choose a cheaper service. So there's still quite a lot of flexibility and choice there for the householder. Council can charge that cost annually, so administration is much lower. Some of the downsides, if a household chooses a larger bin, there is always that tendency to fill it up before it's put out for collection, and usually that ends up being garden waste or other stuff that shouldn't really be in there. Once you've filled your bin, you can't really put any extra out like you can with some of the bag services. So if your bin's full, that's it, you have to wait for the next collection. There can be a bit of an issue with administration where households, when the service is first introduced, choose a bin size, and then later on they find out that actually they need a bigger one, or they could make do with a smaller one, is usually what happens. And so there's a bit of administration as the service beds in, with householders working out which bin size they actually need. And because of the way this service is provided and the fact that it is so similar to the way a lot of private companies collect rubbish, council could be perceived as competing quite directly with the private sector. So in discussions with all of the council officers, and because we feel that some of these options are just not feasible for New Zealand, these are the options that we don't believe are worth taking forward to look at further. So we've got the sticker on the bag, using RFID tags for either a weight-based or a volume-based collection, the app, and a weight-based collection service with or without RFID, just because it's just logistically very challenging for New Zealand. So that leaves us with 4 options that we would like to take forward to look at further. The bag-based system, where council provides a prepaid bag rather than a sticker. A bag-based system where council provides some bags as a rates-funded allocation, and then the remainder of the services user pays. The wheelie bin option, where you use a tag to pay for every pickup for your bin, and then that last option that we just covered, which is a wheelie bin, but you pay depending on how much you're using it, whether that's frequency or the size of the bin. So.
Chair, that last option, which is pretty much like, say, I think that's the option probably we use at home. So you get to choose whatever you want, what size bin, how frequent, and all the rest of it. But somehow the truck driver just knows this bin's supposed to get collected on this day. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that would sort of get rid of the need for the tags. The other thing is, what's the big deal with competing with private providers?
It's a bit of a perception issue more than an actual issue. Some private operators might argue that the Commerce Act would prevent councils from using their size and the fact that you can achieve economies of scale as unfairly competing with the private sector. But the Waste Minimisation Act actually specifically provides for councils to compete in the rubbish collection market as long as it is helping to achieve the objectives of your WMMPs. So we don't feel it's a real issue, and obviously the number of councils throughout the country who do provide rubbish collection suggests that it's not, but it's a perceived issue, and it is just something that we're aware of as we're communicating this to the community. Just to be aware that there can be that perception.
Yeah. And just with that option 5, or I guess option 8 as well, with the wheelie bins, again, you as a consumer or as a ratepayer, you get to choose the size bin, and then the tag would be, the cost would be appropriate to the size bin or the number of pickups.
That's an interesting permutation that we hadn't yet added to the list. Wheeled bin services with tags is usually a consistent size bin. So everybody has the same sized bin, but it's just about how frequently it gets picked up. But that's a really good question. I think that would come in under option H. That would be one of the ways that you could have a user pay service that is paid for by frequency. Yeah. So I'll make a note of that.
Genius.
May I just ask for a clarification? Is there anything in the the central government requirement that inhibits a competition from a private provider? Or in, say, option 1, we could do the bags provided plus the private provider could also offer the service?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The bags being provided now, but that's just under waste minimisation through the other company. What's it?
Waste management,
Yeah, waste management.
Enviro Waste,
Yeah.
Smart Environmental. I don't know who.
It's happening now.
Yeah.
But it's just under the,
Yeah.
Just a quick comment, just through you, Madam Chair. With the food collection coming up in 2007, the bags options might not be the best. We need a container, I think. The streets I live in anyway have dogs walking and all sorts of things. So, you know, food would be a very attractive. The other thing is with bags, there is the problem with things like cans and etc. Anything with a sharp edge penetrates, and we left with a lot of this litter lying along the streets. So I would tend to say that the option as a bins, although it has a high capital cost, would be possibly a better option.
So these options are only for rubbish collections. So when you pick up recycling, you'd always pick it up in either a crate or a wheeled bin. Shouldn't be cans in your rubbish, really shouldn't. And when food scraps are collected, they're usually, if it's a food scraps only service, they're also collected in a small plastic bin that has a lockable lid. So we're only talking about what residual waste would be collected in.
I just, if we do go for a bag option, or if you come back to us with that, I'd really like an option that doesn't presume that people put out one bag per week. Like our household is really conscientious about recycling and composting and things like that, and we'd be lucky to put out one bag you know, every 4 weeks or something, you know. So, and I'd be disappointed if I was, you know,
given
handed out
52 bags.
52 bags. Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
I could trade a bag for some meat or something. because you know, you could trade in barter your bag if you're environment, you know, because a family next door could be like mine with too many kids. So seriously, it's a bit like Roger's set up with the sheds. You know, like if people start thinking of efficiencies is what you're saying. And that's part of the marketing. People think a bit differently. I like that.
I'm just going to put a plug in for one of your definite no options, because to me, the coolest way this could be done is an app, RFIDs on your bin, pay as you go. We're doing we're on a digital transformation pathway. That'd be the coolest way you could do this. The data you'd capture would be epic. You could do it on volume or mass, and over time you could hit these targets of reduction, because we'd know exactly what was happening. To be honest, a couple of your arguments against it, I don't really buy, like the RFID accuracy. We run this on our cows, 1% error rate's about where we sit, but it's almost never a miss match, it's a miss, which who cares? If the truck's picking up 1,000 bins and it misses one, it doesn't matter, it's negligible. The speed, I don't know about that. I just thought it's the coolest option, it's the most future-proofed, it's really cool, and it's an automatic no. For me, that's a tiny bit sad, but
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I mean, we'd love RFIDs to work. We really would, and I guess that's one of the advantages we could add to the wheeled bin-based services. Actually, is usually you'd add an RFID to a bin when it goes out anyway, because they are useful for many things, and they only add about $1 to the cost of each bin. So you'd usually, like you say, future-proof the system by adding the RFIDs when the bins go out, so that you could potentially introduce this kind of system once it's actually working. But does Waipa want to be the guinea pig for a service like that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can't, yeah. Fast follower, I suppose, rather than a pioneer. Just the final part of the argument is that, you know, certain demographics or certain people couldn't be part of that. Well, they're not part of it now. You know, there are options. So I don't know, it just seems a little sad that that seriously cool option we're ruling out for me.
Perhaps can I just add to that? In a future life, quite a while ago, I worked a lot with technology for weighing bales, etc., and on silage wagons, etc. So I was quite competent with working on those. And what we found was that the technology's moved quite a lot. You could actually have a single driver with GPS who has the location on his GPS. He picks up the bin, it would automatically weigh it, all right, and register it to that GPS address and put it in. To me, that takes away that one person running along the way, taking tags off. Two, you can operate it. Most trained people could be trained to operate that efficiently. There's far more options in this, and you know, we look at straight away, but I do think that that could be looked at.
The downside with needing to weigh a bin as you collect it is, I mean, I'm sure you've seen these trucks out there picking up the bins. The accuracy to which that bin needs to be measured, because you're charging based on weight under the Weights and Measures Act, the bin has to come to a complete stop. It needs to hold the bin for long enough that it can measure a reliable weight before it gets emptied. And so the downside of that system is how much slower the collection round is.
I do tend to agree with you, but that its period of total stop has been decreased quite a lot lately. So that the technology that you're using with electronics now and quicker reading, and the thing is that what used to be the case is that you had to be completely stable, I agree with you, so that the bin wasn't rocking, moving and giving an incorrect reading. And I do agree that that does have sometimes, but we're only talking inaccuracies of about 5%. So it's not a great percentage point.
Yeah, I guess once again, I would just say that it's not a system that's used in New Zealand for household rubbish collections anywhere yet. And exactly, does Waipa want to be the first? And let's bear in mind, you know, we're not saying this is how the service is going to be provided. What we're aiming to do with these options, and it might be a good time to move on to the next steps, is this is to give us some idea of what the 4 preferred options might look like, so that we've got something we can go away and put some numbers to, so that we can say, hey, look, this collection has fantastic outcomes for waste minimisation, but it's you know, $15 per household more expensive. And so that gives you some further information to narrow the choices down even further, so that we can then go out to the community and say, hey, you know, here's 2 potential services. What do you think? Is cost really important to you? Is waste minimisation really important to you? Is having a bin really important to you? Assuming that one of them might be a bin service, one of them might be bags, to get that kind of feedback from your community. But not to preempt what might actually come out from the market when you do get to the point of going out for your service, if that's what you're going to do. The problems could all be solved by then, and we can have our RFID wheelie bin service.
Yeah, just one comment on the folks that say, you know, it's like doubling up buying bags, but like a lot of kitchens have got those little pull out rubbish systems, and we've got quite a big one. It's like basically under the bench to the floor. But if you put a yellow bag in it, it's still, when you pull it out, it's actually only half full. And they're really inefficient. And then if you put a black bag in it, which is what we do, and when we use the yellow bag system, then it would almost take 2 of you to squeeze the thing in. It was quite difficult. It was very mucky. And so it's either way. And now with no plastic bags at supermarkets, which is good, you can't just use little bags because you can't find them. And I don't know, on just wheelie bins, they're saying that my recycle bin blew over the other day and it's now full. I had to stand on it, jump off the trailer into it this morning, but and now it's a month between, you know, so the bins do fall over.
Yep.
But I'm a fan of the bins.
She's all go at the Pettit household, isn't it?
I can see the stress levels.
Clearly
Yeah,
in
the stress
Dale.
levels. I was going to raise the fact about the bin solution, that we've already had feedback from people in our community that they don't have rooms for the bins, especially for those, you know, that are living in those more compact housing or high density living. And I'd just like you to bear that in mind, that whether or not we could have some kind of option where you could share with your neighbours, or, you know, if you've got this many units, there's a way to at least provide the service but not increase the number of bins or something. I think that'd be really useful.
With any council provided service, there's exceptions made for what we call MUDs, multi-unit developments. So there's usually exceptions made for roughly, you know, maybe 5% of properties. They might be there might be people who can't actually put a bin out or a bag out on the curb, and so there's allowance for assisted collections in a contract. But then you'd also make allowances for MUDs to potentially have a shared service that they all use. So it might be a bigger bin, but it's shared between 2 units or 4 units or something. But that's that's an operational problem that you'd resolve at the contract stage. Yeah.
Just random wondering, are we able to do any R&D around possibly doing a pilot project around that app stuff and looking at a couple of our newly developed areas and sectioning off some of those just to try that? Because I really love the app for Karo as well, because we will get to a stage where there will be more of us wanting to use the app system, I'm thinking, and it goes well with our digitalization strategy as well. The last part is not for you though, Lisa. It's to look at the petted household and say, kia kaha koutou, hei whakatakato o koutou para, which means in English, reduce your consumerism, e hoa. Kia kaha.
Good on you.
So it can often be really attractive for tenderers if they know that they're bidding for a contract with a council who is keen to try new things. And that is often something that we suggest to councils is before you actually go out to the market, you do some interviews with the sector beforehand and say, hey, look, you know, we're really keen to look at some of these emerging technologies, and maybe we can allocate a section of the community to trial something. And because the contractors are looking for that as well, you know, they need somewhere to develop these systems. So definitely.
I'd be keen to see how we could possibly marry up with Extreme Waste to do that, and having such a small community that might be interested in investing in that, and because they're really innovative out there. So I'm just wondering whether they might be a good partnership out there.
Like that idea, Dale. Any other comments? Oh, look, Monty's very excited by that.
Oh, no, I am.
Can I just say, I love that rubbish collection systems are being viewed as being cool and interesting and techie. It's great. Love it.
Just if we do go bins, let's put our RFIDs on the bins,
Yes.
right? Because it's a buck and it future
Yeah.
proofs these kind of options, which
Yeah.
it blows you away when you see these kind of systems working.
I think that's a no-brainer. You know, if a bin costs $55 and for another $1 you can put a tag on it before it's delivered. Yep. And then it might cost you $5 to go back out and put them on later. So yeah.
Internationally, does anybody have, like, who would we be following, or in terms of that techie sort of space? Are there any other international examples where different models have been adopted that's been a roaring success that we can perhaps pick out the bits that work? And
yeah, I think Australia is probably the most likely one to develop real cool techie systems. They tend to have a fairly similar density to New Zealand towns and cities. So they are trying to deal with the same, you know, operational issues that we are. The UK actually still use bag-based collections in a lot of places because they have no street space, they have no space on the property. They frequently have 3 or 4 individual dwellings within one house. So for a lot of UK cities, at least, bags are still really popular. So probably not a huge amount there. The USA still tend to be quite focused on let's give you the biggest bin that we possibly can and just make sure that everything possible gets put in it, and we'll come and take it away as quickly as possible so you don't have to think about it. So not a great example for user pays systems. And then I guess you'd look at Europe. There's probably quite a few examples in Europe, but mostly private sector driven rather than whatever their different forms of local government are.
And any other questions or comments on this item? No? Hey, that's been really interesting, really, and really looking forward to seeing what you come, further discussion on this. It's certainly a space that, we've definitely been told by our communities that they want a better performance in that space, and accepting that some districts do rate and collect and others don't makes us sort of a bit of an outlier now. So, and to Mike's point, it would be not so much as a lost opportunity, but it would be quite cool if we were able to be leaders, not necessarily guinea pigs. That's not really the word I'd like, but early adopters, should we say, would be a good place to be. But thank you. Thanks so much for that, Lisa.
Thanks.
Now it looks like it's our lunch break. And we should be back after lunch.